Dear friends, welcome to yet another installment of Strategic Power. In this video, we are going to talk about Vladimir Putin's interview with Tucker Carlson, a much anticipated event that, according to sources close to the Russian president, will clarify many confusing points about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, don't waste any time. Subscribe now and turn on notifications to receive all the latest updates. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is one of the most followed conflicts in history, with almost real-time broadcasts of events on the battlefield. However, the real motives behind the invasion are treated as propaganda tools by both sides, often obscuring reality. On the one hand, Russia, which launched the attack, says it did not start the war, arguing that it is only a special military operation and that they are acting in Ukraine to stop an aggression initiated by the West. The Russians also cite other objectives, such as eliminating what they call the Nazi threat and preventing NATO from getting closer to their borders. On the other hand, Ukraine claims it is simply being attacked and invaded for wanting to determine its own future, a future that, for Ukrainians, must be far from Russia, seeking greater rapprochement with the European Union, the United States and NATO. With all these arguments, counter-arguments and narratives, having the opportunity to hear directly from the architect of this war seems an excellent opportunity to thoroughly understand the perspective of the aggressor. The interview began with a brief introduction from Tucker Carlson, mentioning that the interview, originally scheduled to last 2 hours, ended up extending beyond expectations. The first question was direct, asking Putin about the reasons that led him to attack Ukraine. Putin responded with another question: where does Ukraine come from? Putin then went back to the 9th century, recounting the story of a people living in Novgorod who invited Prince Rurik of Scandinavia to lead them. He spent almost 30 minutes describing events from the last 1200 years in an attempt to demonstrate that Ukraine is not a nation and that Ukrainians are essentially Russians who were displaced to another region by Soviet leadership in the early 20th century. In summary, Putin devoted a quarter of his interview to reinforcing what he has already said several times in the past, that Ukraine is not a legitimate separate entity, that it historically belongs to Russia, and that Ukrainians are actually Russian. In fact, during the 2 hours and 7 minutes of conversation in the interview, Putin spent more than half the time lecturing on historical events, which, in his view, justify his intention to annex Ukraine. This was clear even to Tucker Carlson, who expressed having been convinced that Putin genuinely believes that Russia has the historical right to claim parts of Ukraine due to its past as part of the Russian Empire. Putin even asked one of his assistants for letters written by the Cossack Bogdan Khmelnytsky in the 17th century, which, according to him, proved that Ukraine was never a separate entity. Given Putin's insistence on focusing on centuries-old historical events, Carlson tried to interrupt him, asking how those events related to the 2022 invasion. He even directly questioned Putin whether he really believed Ukraine historically belonged to Russia, questioning him why wait until 2022 to invade it and why not act sooner. However, Putin avoided answering directly, preferring to go back to 1654, when Hungary and Ukraine were in conflict, resulting in parts of Ukraine's current borders. He then asked if Hungary had the right to claim 1654 borders. Carlson, clearly confused by the answer and aware that the interview was not going in the direction he expected, tried to change the focus once again by asking Putin if he had suggested to Viktor Orbán, the Hungarian Prime Minister, that Hungary could acquire parts of Ukrainian territory in the event of a Russian victory. Putin replied that he had never discussed this with Orbán. Putin also laid out his view on significant events of World War II, even claiming that the Poles were to blame for the start of the conflict, since they refused to negotiate with Hitler. For him, World War II began because the Poles did not want to cooperate, which led Hitler to invade Poland. When he finally addressed the most recent events in Ukraine, Putin highlighted the fall of pro-Russian President Viktor Yanukovych in 2014, describing it as a coup d'état supported by the United States, the CIA, and the European Union, with the goal of moving Ukraine away from Russian influence. He claimed the war began there on the initiative of the West, and that his current intervention aims only to end it. When asked if he had already achieved his goals, and if he was satisfied with what he had conquered in Ukraine, Putin answered negatively, saying that the process of denazification is still underway. That denazification is a term used in Russia to refer to the removal of Zelensky's government and its replacement by a pro-Russian government, similar to what happened before with Yanukovych and as is currently happening in Belarus with dictator Lukashenko.